everybody. How many of y'all took shelter for the tornado this past week? A couple people? A couple people are fearless. Well, last week I started an introductory type sermon on apologetics, which is, using facts, logic, philosophy, history, archaeology, science, creation, etc., to help analyze all the evidence out there that shows proof of God, proof of the Bible, proof of Jesus, to help as kind of support. And then last week what I was doing was I showed all the biblical support for apologetics, verses like 1 Peter 3:15 that says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks of you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." And we worked through 19 other verses showing how there's reasons for us to be prepared, to be able to explain ourselves, explain what we believe in, explain why, which I know a lot of times we're kind of ill-equipped at that, at least I feel that way. But really my main motivation for wanting to dive into this area of study and kind of spend a couple weeks on it is because of a study that they did several years ago showing that over 75% of Christian kids, when they go off to college, leave the faith, leave church, and essentially lose their faith. And obviously it's multifactorial, and there's a lot of aspects tied to that. But often, whenever the kids do go off to college, for example, the professors, the majority of them being atheists, kind of shrug off Christianity as just a bunch of, and the Bible as just a bunch of stories, little kids, children, Sunday school class type stuff. And so many of the kids are easily talked out of their faith because they've never really been talked into it in terms of it's just something they've always believed, and they don't necessarily know the facts behind it. Meaning, obviously, we believe the Bible and everything about it, and that's what we stand on, but there's a world of evidence out there that helps support external evidence. And oftentimes, we're so ill-equipped to be able to lay that out as a defense of the gospel. I love the saying that the best way to get picked off in war is not to know you're in war. And we definitely are in a spiritual war out there, and Satan is continually attacking the Bible, God, and the church. And so the best way to prevent that is to know we're at war and to know what our resources are. Paul in 2 Corinthians 10:3-5 says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ." So that's kind of the basis and my motivation behind wanting to jump in this topic. So let's open in a word of prayer. Gabe, would you mind opening this?
Lord Father, in Jesus' name, Lord, we thank you for this time. And we thank you for this church and your presence here, Lord. Just pray, God, that you would bless this topic, Lord, bless this series. Just open our hearts and give our minds understanding, Lord, to fathom the proofs of who you are, God, the proofs of your existence and the faith that we have, Lord, that there is evidence behind you, God. Thank you for who you are. Just pray that you bless us. In Jesus' name we pray.
So today, I was going to take a step back and start at the very basics of examining, is there truth out there? Because we have to establish if truth is possible or if truth is a thing before we can establish God, the Bible, Jesus, everything else that we're going to discuss. So it may seem trivial or elementary, but it's very necessary because we have to have that foundation before we start sharing the gospel with an atheist or before we start raising up our children to be able to present the gospel and live the gospel themselves. I've heard it said that if you really want to teach somebody something, to the point, especially the point where it'll change their life, where it'll really impact them, you have to give 2 whys for every what. And I'm sure those of you who have kids understand that, because a lot of, the saying of do it because I said so kind of wears out really quickly, and you have to start, sometimes you have to explain why. So, and I know there are people out there who are the analytical types, and they want to know. They don't want to just do something because you said so. They want to know why. So to really convince people, sometimes the 2 whys for every what goes a long way. And we won't win over minds for Christ, especially the skeptical unbeliever types, with the whole because I said so, or because that's what I believe, or even saying, well, that's what the Bible says. Somebody who doesn't believe, they're not going to buy into that necessarily. You have to prove it to them. So, truth, that's the topic for today. The definition of truth is really vague. It's fact, reality, it's the standard, it's the basics of what you're talking about. So the question is, does truth exist? Can we know the truth? And this is important for many reasons, because if you just stop and look out at the world, there are so many opinions out there and so many people claiming they know the truth. For example, atheists claim there's no God, and they say that's the truth. Hindus say there's many gods, and that's polytheism. Muslims say there's only one God, and his name's Allah. We say there's only one God in three persons, and his name is God. And then there's people out there which really embody kind of the culture I feel like of America. I think it's just been in the past year or so, but both Madonna and George Lucas both said identical statements that said all paths lead to God. There's also spiritual organizations out there that the way I look at it, they're stealing from God, but they create church and they even do things like praying. But what they're doing is they're trying to create an affirmative environment to create a world that works for everyone, where all religions are accepted. It doesn't matter. As long as you believe something, then you're good, kind of thing. And I know several organizations like that. But can that be true? Can everybody be right? Or does truth really matter? Well, you can bet your life on it that truth matters. It just makes sense. It's self-evident. There has to be a truth out there. Because philosophically speaking, it's impossible to lie without there being truth to be lying about. There has to be a corresponding reality. If our words don't correspond with facts, then they can never be factually incorrect. And therefore, there can never be a true or a false statement made. Aristotle actually proved this a long time ago in his statement where he said, "We have set forth that it is impossible for anything at the same time to be and to not to be. And by this means have shown that it is the most indisputable of all principles. To affirm and deny in the same breath would be to destroy language. It would be to deny all substance, all truth, and all probability." There's a famous apologeticist, his name's Rabbi Zacharias, and he said, "The laws of logic must apply to reality. Else, we may all as well be living in a madhouse." So it just makes sense that there has to be a truth. So then we're going to get to, well, how do we know that? What is the truth? And that's what we're going to be working through. So as we start in this subject of apologetics, one of the big questions to be asking yourself, or if you're having a conversation with an unbeliever when you're sharing the gospel, one of the biggest questions to ask is, if Christianity is true, would you become a Christian? I think all of us in this room would agree we're going to become Christian. We're all on the same page. But it's an important question to have when you're discussing with somebody, because if you're having a discussion with them, and even if you present all the facts, and they say, no, even if it's true, I'm not going to believe it, because there are people out there. Truth exists and God exists. We all know that. But many people don't want to believe that. They don't want to believe it because they don't want to have to subject to God. They don't want to have to live by the Bible. They don't want to have to apply it to themselves. And so with that kind of person, those are the kind that you can only win over by praying, by the influence of the Holy Spirit, by living with them and showing them Christ-like love. And that's the whole, Peter talked about it in 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2, with an unbelieving husband living with a believing wife that wins them over without using words. That's 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2. So that kind of person, you can't use logic and try to convince them, because they've already made up in their heart that they're not going to believe no matter what. So this conversation of apologetics is not to convince that kind of person. It's more to strengthen our faith, and for the person who's actually looking for truth to be able to explain to them logically what we believe and why we believe it. The United States Constitution, I'm sure you all know the phrase that says, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oftentimes in America, Americans are on a quest for happiness, even if it means they have to give up truth for the sake of happiness. So we have to ask ourselves sometimes, are we willing to sacrifice truth for the altar of happiness? If you look at the trends in America, it totally reflects that. I mean, just in past years, many states are legalizing abortion, same-sex marriages, marijuana. It's a free-for-all because they're ignoring all the fundamental truths that we've known as a country for all the time because they're looking for happiness. They're willing to give up truth for happiness. But the irony of pursuing happiness versus truth is that the harder you chase after happiness, especially if you're directly chasing it, it's going to cost you truth, and yet you're never going to be able to obtain happiness. But if you pursue truth, absolute truth, every time if you're pursuing truth, it's going to lead you to God and His Word, and in doing that, it's going to lead you to lifelong happiness, joy, and the better word really would be contentment. And that's despite your actual physical circumstances. Because oftentimes when we're thinking of happiness, we're thinking of our physical circumstance, and that would be like prosperity gospel stuff, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about true joy and contentment in spite of your situation. So all of that I point out to say is that as fallen, sinful people, we're obviously often selfishly willing to ignore the truth or hide from the truth so that we can find happiness. But we must check our motives periodically, especially when we're trying to find the truth, because we need to ensure that we're truly looking with clear motives for what we're looking at. In John, Jesus says that He is the way, the truth, and the life. He also says in John, in another spot, that we can know the truth and that the truth will set us free. And so it's of the utmost importance that we, with clear eyes, are looking for the truth. And as we'll see, it'll ultimately point us to Jesus. So what do we say in response to people who sometimes present to us, they say, well, there's no real truth, or how do we know your truth is the truth? There's another apologeticist who talks about turning the argument on itself and directing it back to itself. And you'll be able to see if it'll actually stand. And so if somebody says, well, there's no real truth, it's all just subjective. There's no real truth. Well, then the response is, well, is that true? Is that statement true that there really is no truth? Because that's a self-defeating argument. It doesn't last. Another favorite is those that say all truth is relative. Or that may be true for you, but that's not true for me. My truth is different than your truth. Well, if you turn that on yourself and say, well, is that a relative truth? If you look closely and you'll notice these claims don't meet their own standards. The claim that all truth is relative is actually trying to make a claim on absolute truth, and so it can't stand. If that's confusing, another way I like to look at it is the saying of, if somebody comes up to you and says, I can't speak a word of English, well, that violates all the laws of non-contradiction because they just spoke to you a whole sentence in English. So that is not true. Some people argue that truth is about perspective, or that it's true for you but not true for me, like I was saying. The way you would answer that is, well, is that true for everyone, or is that just true for you? The example that best illustrates that is if a customer walks into a bank and he goes up to the teller and he asks for $100,000. Well, the teller pulls up his account and looks and says, I'm sorry, sir, you only have $47.12. I can't give you $100,000. Well, then that customer, very animated and full of passion, tries to convince the teller, no, I have $100,000, you need to give it to me. Well, and then if he proceeds to tell the teller, oh, well, that's just true for you and what your computer says, but that's not true for me. My account says I have $100,000, so give it to me. Well, how many of you think he's going to actually get the money? He's not. So, anyone who thinks that this guy is crazy, or might actually believe him, They're just confusing his confidence for truth. Because confidence is not equal truth. I don't know if any of you have ever talked to anybody from another religion or an atheist. Sometimes, a lot of times they are very confident in what they're believing. But that doesn't mean they're right. That doesn't mean they have the truth. So confidence does not equal truth. You can be very confident about something and yet be very wrong about it. You can also not have very much confidence, but still be very absolutely right in the truth. Those who confuse confidence in their religion or belief system with the truth are looking at the wrong things, usually. What they're usually looking at is how they know something, of what they think is true. They're looking at how they think they know it. That is an area that they call epistemology. I can't say the big words. They're not veterinarian words, so I can't say them. Epistemology. But instead they need to look at not how they know it, but why they can know the truth exists. And that's the study of ontology. So in the example of the bank analogy, to help make it make more sense, if you're a bystander watching this all go down, and you decided to think to yourself, that guy is very confident, and he really seems convinced that he has that $100,000 in his bank, so I think he is right, and I think he has the truth, and that he needs $100,000. You would be using that logic in your mind is epistemology, because you're analyzing how you came to that, because he's very confident, he's forceful, he seems to believe it in his heart. That's a study of epistemology. However, if you're another bystander watching it, and you observe the scenario, and you concluded that the teller, he between the facts, he's looking up his bank statements, he's looking in the bank accounts, he looks at the history of the client, and he quickly tallied and said, nope, you only have $47.12, you would be using ontology, because you would be seeing why the teller can know that, because he has facts, he has history, he has data, he has evidence to give to present to this guy that no, you don't have $100,000, you're not getting it. And so if you said, oh, the teller has the truth, then you would be using ontology. All that to say that there is truth in that example. The guy doesn't have $100,000 in his account, he only has $47,000. But depending on how you look at it, you might come to different conclusions, but that does not mean the truth has changed, it's just how you're looking at all the facts. And so you need to be careful if you're looking at why something is the case or how something is the case. Because there are two types of truth out there. There's subjective truth and objective truth. Subjective truth are truths that are within ourselves, and objective truths are truths that are outside of ourselves. In our culture today, many people are trying to combine them or not differentiate subjective and objective truth. Just listen to people who get interviewed on the news. They are very adamant that they know what they're talking about is the truth, and they're very passionate about it. But a lot of it is just their opinions, their feelings on the matter. It's not actually that they're presenting objective truth. But they try to mix them and have a little subjective, but then they also have a little bit of fact in there, and they're presenting a mixed truth. But you have to be able to differentiate between subjective and objective. So we all have opinions, and that's kind of more of the subjective truth. So for example, my favorite movie, we all have favorite movies. Probably they're not all the same. My favorite movie is Tombstone. My favorite dessert is ice cream. Those are opinions, those are subjective truths about myself. I'm not saying that if we did a study on the best dessert that we're going to all land on ice cream. But for me, that's my subjective truth. There are some things that aren't based on opinion at all. Those are the objective truths. So another analogy is, say I have 5 fingers on my hand, which I do. My opinion won't change that. Say I want to have 6 fingers or 4 fingers. No matter how badly I want that opinion to change, it's not going to change the objective truth that I have 5 fingers on my hand. So when we're discussing truth, specifically referring to claims about God, we must wade through people's subjective opinions and objective truth. And we must do that even on our own level too, because we all bring that to the table. We all have stuff that we believe and we've been taught and raised, and by golly, it's the truth. But it might be 75% objective and 25% subjective. And so you have to even make sure you're standing on the truth too, because everybody kind of combines those. Because our claims about God need to be objective and not subjective. They don't need to be our opinions, because we could be wrong about it. There's an objective claim. If we make an objective claim about reality and we include our subjective opinion in it, we're going to tamper the evidence and confuse people. Also, I love how Paul words it, but when he talks about how that we might be wrong about Jesus and the resurrection, but if we're not, then we need to give our everything for it. We need, it's either all or nothing. So either Christianity is true or it isn't. Either God exists or He doesn't. And we need to be able to differentiate that and find what is the truth in the matter. It's either objectively false or it's objectively true. Because truth does exist, we just need to find what the truth is. I hope I have not given you intellectual constipation yet. So, I know I was kind of heavy on the philosophy this week, and I kind of apologize about that. But I wanted to kind of set the ground to show you for next week, because we're going to dive into evidence showing that God does exist. And we need to be able to, in that conversation, know that He is indeed God, and that He is the God of the Bible, and He is not God of another religion, or not a God at all, or a polytheistic God. And we need to be able to separate that out and find what is truth in regards to God. And then the next week we'll talk about what is truth in the Bible. Is the Bible true? And so everything we're going to go through is going to come back to the foundation of what is truth and how do we know it's true. And so we needed to kind of have that basic. So after today, I hope that you can all confidently say, yes, truth exists. And this is so important because once we find truth, we need to be confident that we're standing on the truth. I love John 14:6 when Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. So as we're doing this, obviously we're doing it through a church standpoint and church setting, and I'm going to throw in as many Bible verses as we go through this as we can. But also I want to bring in a whole bunch of external evidence. But we can't forget that Jesus is the way, Jesus is the truth, and Jesus is the life, which is the whole reason we're doing all this and going to be talking about all this. Also, as parents, as friends, as co-workers, we can't forget verses like Deuteronomy 6:4-9. It says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words I command you today, you shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. And you shall talk to them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. The reason we're working through all this is to help strengthen our faith, but also to help us to be able to teach our kids, to witness to our friends, our coworkers, to be able to, in everyday conversation, when we're eating, when we're walking, we need to be so well informed that we're able to carry on conversations with people about God and not just it be a topic that is just our faith and so it's kind of vague and we can't really share it with anybody. We need to be able to have it everywhere in our hearts and in our mind, in our soul. We need to be thinking about when we're going to sleep, when we're rising. So that's my challenge for you this week, is to start laying the foundation for what truth is. And next week we'll start talking about how we know that God is God and not some other religion's God. And that'll be our basics and our starting point. So let's close in prayer. Father, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for your word that you've given to us, for communicating to us. We thank you for sending your Son, Father. We thank you that Jesus is the way, the life, and the truth, Lord. Thank you for giving us truth, for allowing us to know that there is a right and a wrong, a true and a false, a way and a wrong way, Father. We just pray that this week you'll help us to challenge ourselves to spend more time in your word, to just saturate our hearts and our minds with you, Father. Help us to find that way. Help us to find that truth. And help us to find that life in you that only you can give. We just love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a good week.